Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're going to be talking about the FITE axis and how it represents ethical action. And we're here with Kyle today. And so would you like to tell us your thoughts?
Yeah, I always like to set the context when we're talking about cognitive functions. So, very, very important to distinguish between how it kind of shows up exterior and what's actually going on. So, the polarity of extroverted thinking and introverted feeling together, yeah, they kind of do the ethical action thing. That's what it shows up as. Very specifically, these are decision-making functions, right? So it's not about what kind of jobs you have or that you have lots of passion projects. They do specific things when we're making decisions. And the other thing is they can show up quite differently depending on where they are in your cognitive function stack. So that's kind of important. But so at its base, what we're doing is looking at the data that we've gathered with our perceiving functions. And then that part of our brain, the decision-making part of our brain, is now saying, okay, now how can I make a proper decision with this data? Or what does this mean to me? How can I use this data? So the extroverted thinking, very specifically, is using the criteria: does this work? Does this create the outcome? Does this accomplish the task? Is this gonna close the loop, kind of thing? Like, it likes to just finish, make the decision, and now we got the decision. We don't have to revisit a million times. Introverted feeling is typically a whole lot slower and complex because it doesn't have the easy to compare metrics that if extroverted thinking uses. So extroverted thinking, like, you're also looking at what does it cost? How long is it going to take? How much effort is it going to take? All of these things you could actually even put a number to, because then it's super easy to compare, and then you have a result. And then once you have a metric in place, you can make lots of decisions. So it's like super efficient. Introverted feeling kind of is like, let's take away all of that. How does this impact me? If it's sophisticated, it also can ask, how is this impacting individuals? But at its root, it starts with, like, how am I experiencing this? So when I make this decision, does it make sense in terms of my belief structures and my ethics and all of my different intentions? And that can be a very slow process because there isn't just one little metric you can look at. You actually have to kind of look at all of the diverse parts of you. So how in depth do you want to go here, Joyce?
Yeah, as in-depth as you want to. And so the high TE types are the TJs. So that would be the ENTJ, ESTJ mostly, and then the INTJ and ISTJ too. And the high FI types are the FP types, mainly the INFP and ISFP, and then followed by the ENFP and ESFP.
Yeah. And so the important distinction there, I mean, for people that like to think about dichotomies, thinkers versus feelers, it's not. So in my description, you'll notice that I didn't actually talk about emotions at all. They are kind of circling around it, but it's not specifically like introverted feeling isn't making decisions like on pure emotion. There is this massive, but what we mean by emotion versus like feeling versus thinking in this case is more the difference between the objective and the subjective. So TE as an objective metric is looking at the outside world and getting the feedback from the outer world, and then using that data that they've gathered with their perceiving functions, but it's using that data to make decisions. So really, so a TE Dom or someone with a TE Copilot, the TJs, they're usually pretty keyed into either other people's feedback or the feedback of the physical world, or it's all about the external world coming in, and it's making distinctions there and figuring things out based on that data. Whereas the feeling component of introverted feeling is the subjective component. It's very much like my own beliefs or my own ethics or my own, like, it's kind of a reasoning, but it's not a logical, like, rationalistic reasoning. It's more, it can be a lot more instinctive, actually, and that's where it kind of seems like we use emotion or feeling language. But it's not like introverted feelers are going around only making decisions because they're angry or sad or whatever. They're aware of that more, but extroverted thinkers also have lots of emotion. So I just wanted to tease that part out as well. The higher one of them is in the stack, the more separate those will be. For me, I have, as an ENFP, I've got extroverted thinking and introverted feeling on what we'd call the conscious side of the car at Personality Hacker, or it's the second and third in the cognitive function stack. It means I'm going back and forth a lot between them. And so it can be hard to kind of parse them out. But yeah, so that at its core, if you're using them as the first or fourth functions, they can seem very separate from each other. But for me, it's like super integrated. So when it's more integrated, what happens is that it looks, I would say that things like the actual vision and goals are kind of more set by that introverted feeling function. It's more like, okay, like lots of people have goals in life and I can do lots of things, I can get skills, but what do I personally need? What gets me excited? What am I uniquely maybe suited for, or what's going to like impact my family the most? And like those kinds of things are more in the realm of introverted feeling. So it kind of sets that vision or goal, and then the extroverted thinking is more like, okay, now that I have this goal, how can I go and meet this? It's very handy. They work together really, really well. When I talk to, I do a lot of profiling with TJs, got tons of them recently, and they're typically, the difficulty is in kind of knowing which is the most important goal. But how to get there is like simple. So it's like they tell me like, oh, if somebody has a vision, that's awesome. Like, or if somebody just tells me what they want the outcome to be, phew, all the hard work is done. Now I can just like get the resources in place and activate all those things, because they have all of these, once the vision and goal is there, they have all of these metrics they can quickly slip into and get things accomplished and line it up in order and all of these administrative things. On the flip side, people like the FP types, especially the FI drivers or the FI dominants, can often have that vision so clear, but then when it comes down to implementing it, it can be very difficult because it all has to match the resonance of that vision. And so then what ends up happening is one INFP that I profiled was big into building fireplaces out of stone. And then if like one thing in the project would come up and he's like, oh no, I can't achieve that vision anymore, then it's like, I don't want to have a plan B. Like, how can I now get close to that vision? And it's like just tempting to just give up and start over again, start fresh, because I really want that vision. And so you can see when they're on that driver 3-year-old or dominant inferior positions, it's kind of like they need some help with the back seat, but they're really good at the front seat, and it can be an issue there. Circling back, sorry, any brain, making more connections as I talk, separate podcast or a separate issue. The TE drivers, what happens is that once they've made a decision, they don't really want to revisit it, because that means I have to come up with kind of the reasoning again, or like I have to come up with that vision again. So why don't I just make a decision and I can always go back to that decision? So if we're revisiting like the end goals, that's kind of like the worst thing, because that's already kind of hard and icky to come up with that personal vision. And so then it can become a place where a TE driver is just like keeping on making that same decision, even if it's maybe even to the point of it being suboptimal, but at least it works, right? You know, it works, so we'll just keep doing it that way. But the context has changed, and so then sometimes they can get stuck that way.
As Kyle was explaining, when your introverted feeling is stronger, it tends to manifest as a desire to remain value consistent or congruent within yourself, or resonant consistent. And so the thing that you're doing, you want it to line up with that emotional vision or that value vision of what resonates the most, of what is most true to thyself. Very stereotypical phrases FI users might make is, I want a job that is uniquely me. Or something like, what is the meest me? If it's a dominant process and it's very strong. And it's almost kind of idealistic or almost romanticized to a certain degree. Like, I want something that fits me completely.
Yeah, or with a narrative attached to it, like, oh, this is the story of my life that's going there. And now everybody can have that. So even a TE driver could have those things. And it's like, oh, I want a place that's uniquely me. But it tends to be just a little bit more black and white, or it's like, as you know, maybe what's uniquely me is getting good feedback from other people, or a place where I can really help others, right? So they still have that element. So even if you have either of these functions as your last function, it's still super real and aspirational, right? So like an FI driver doesn't, like, they still want to do something, because if you don't do anything, it's not really ethical to begin with, or you're not making an impact. So there's always that element. It's like, we really want it, but you have to go mechanically through the rest of your cognitive function stack to get to that last function.
Exactly. And if introverted feeling is your last function in a TE dominant type, how it can manifest is also pushing aside your feelings into a box until the job gets done. And so seeing if it resonates with you or how you feel about it takes the afterthought after you've gotten the end result that you've wanted to get. For some TE dominants, I've heard it described as feelings kind of happen to them because it takes them time to sometimes register it until it actually hits. Or they try to push it away until it's an ideal, optimal situation to process them. So until the job gets done, then I will think about how I feel about this.
Yeah, and another way of putting it, a different type of phraseology I've heard is more like, oh, is this an appropriate time for emotions? So like, I have all these strong emotions, and you may, TE drivers may be very aware of the emotions that they have. They're not necessarily super nuanced and complex like an FI will have, but they're still, it's meaningful and important to them. But it's more like, well, I'll only share those at an appropriate time, or if it's useful, like in the middle of the job site when I'm trying to assign jobs, I'm not going to start like crying because there's no point right now, and it's not really going to be received well to begin with right then. So, Joyce, we've also heard a couple recently of TE drivers talking about putting on a suit. And so then it's like super happy on the outside right now because this is what people need from me or expect from me or want from me. But as soon as they get home, it's like, oh, gotta take off this suit. And now it's like, oh, now I can be me again. And so there's that relief. So it's a real, like, they want to be authentic too. It's just they know when it's not appropriate or when they're going to get the bad feedback. Whereas for, let's say, an authenticity driver, that's kind of like a foreign thing. Like some of them might say, like, I kind of wish I knew how to figure out what people wanted, because it's a pain to always be unique and always be focused on myself, right? And so, yeah, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's like, oh man, I really do wish that I had the suit that I could put on sometimes, but it doesn't quite work that well.
Yeah, and so the higher up a function is, the greater the comfort and sophistication when using it. just to limit the conversation because extroverted intuition could continue on indefinitely.
Forever. There's way more nuance that we haven't hit here, guys.
Yeah. And E is like all of the nuance, all of the exceptions, all of the complexity. And as we're talking, they make more connections. And so I really appreciate that trait in you, Kyle. And we're going to continue this chat some other day because you have so many gold nuggets. It's a mountain. And so thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. I hope this allowed you to understand FITE as a tandem axis in more detail. All right. Take care.